It's the Free Relief Golf Podcast. Thanks to the Blue Wire Hustle program, this is the place where listeners can explore the hidden cost of elite amateur golf. It'll always cost nothing to get some free relief, so let's get on with it, shall we? Welcome back to the Free Relief Golf Podcast. I'm Freddie, and as always, I hope you're safe and well. This podcast is going to have a slightly different feel to it. Whilst hopefully still informative and somewhat factual, a lot of this podcast will be based upon my subjective experiences of the World Handicap System, that's the WHS, so far since its global implementation on the 2nd of November 2020. Basically, I have some issues, and I'm asking for help to address them, and in this podcast I will cover my current situation as well as the possible options and resolutions to it. But I'll say from the outset, but if you've been similarly affected by the handicap system, like myself, and would like to share your story, drop me an email at freddielawrence.golf at gmail.com, and maybe we can help each other out. So previously, UK golfers were part of the Congu Unified Handicap System, that's the Council of National Golf Unions, and the Council of National Golf Unions encompassed not just all the home nations, but Middle Eastern countries, African countries as well. Well, some of them at least. But now Congu is part of this banner of the World Handicap System. What is the World Handicap System? Well, unless you've been living in a cave, you probably already know, but I'll give you some outlines. According to the RNA website, the World Handicap System was launched in January 2020 and will provide golfers with a unified and more inclusive handicapping system for the first time. Though many countries adopted the new system in January, the system will go live in other parts of the world throughout the year to accommodate different implementation plans and variations in the golfing calendar. So in the UK, the World Handicap System came in November 2020. What is the World Handicap System? Well, according to the Scottish Golf website, the World Handicap System aims to bring 6 different handicap systems together into a single set of rules for handicapping, enabling golfers of different abilities to play and compete on a fair and equal basis, no matter how or where they play. While the 6 existing handicap systems have generally worked very well locally, on a global basis their different characteristics have sometimes resulted in inconsistency, with players of the same ability ending up with slightly different handicaps. This has sometimes resulted in unnecessary difficulties and challenges for golfers competing in handicap events or for tournament administrators. A single World Handicap System will pave the way to consistency and portability. That's what I have to say about it. The system itself is an adjustment, right? But it works. It's worth clarifying briefly just how it works so we're on the same page. But if you're a golfer in the UK, you will no doubt have already experienced this. Before a round, a player declares their intentions to submit a score. Probably happens in an online format right now, given COVID stuff. They post a score afterwards, after having played the round, and the score goes into your record. In your record, we take the 8 best differentials from your last 20 scores, that's your last 20 in date order, and these differentials are averaged to create a handicap index, which should accurately reflect a player's recent form. There are soft and hard caps, and apparently some sort of inbuilt memory with regard to previous best scores, blah blah blah. If you're listening, you probably know all of this already, or at least have experienced some of this. However, that is not what this podcast is about. This podcast is about my situation with their World Handicap System, and here is my situation in short. Before the switch over, I had 1 handicap, maintained in England by my home club Garan Park. My handicap was plus 1.5. Now, I have 2 separate disconnected handicaps, a Scottish one and an English one, each maintained by their respective national governing bodies, i.e. Scottish Golf and England Golf. My handicap index is now plus 2.8, but it's complicated. Stay tuned for a deeper dive into this situation. Oh, it hurts talking about it. So, what's the problem? Why am I making a plea for help? Might sound a tad dramatic. Well, what I've realised as a member of a match and handicap committee myself is that we as committee members can only be as useful or helpful to our members as the information that we are provided with. Most of our queries will go to higher governing bodies, but in general, it would seem that none of these bodies know what's going on with regard to unique situations. We know the general stuff, but if unique situations arise, it would appear that, certainly from my experience, Scottish Golf and England Golf are struggling to respond to these situations. I attended multiple Zoom workshops throughout 2020 to learn more about the incoming World Handicap System. The bulk of the information concerned the general concept. For example, there will be a PCC applied to scores, that's a playing conditions calculation, applied to your scores in your record based upon the day's play. But when it came to specifics, and I remember asking this question in one of the workshops, for example, how is the PCC actually calculated? Little was known or bestowed upon us as committee members. I don't blame anyone or any governing body specifically for this, but in my experience, I'm just saying it feels like everyone is truly learning specifics on the fly. So the issues for me started when the new handicap system came into being on November the 2nd, 2020. I immediately couldn't enter or sign into competitions online because my Scottish club did not have access to my English handicap database. Soon after, it became clear the short-term solution was to create a separate Scottish handicap based upon an entirely new CDH number, a central database of handicaps. So I could be recognised on my Scottish club system as actually having a handicap index. So in turn, I could then be eligible to enter competitions. Shortly after this discovery, I spoke with a friend at the RNA handicap department, and I told them about my Scottish handicap solution to be able to enter competitions, and they said that technically I shouldn't have done that. But what else can I do when I can't enter competitions at all? I need to find a solution. I mean, am I meant to sit and wait for the national governing bodies to figure it out? As of April 2021, I had not yet been able to enter a competition, for reasons I'll go into. At that point, it had already been 6 months since the new system came in, and that has come after years of prior planning for this World Handicap System implementation. If I hadn't have tried to find a solution to be able to enter competitions, it doesn't seem like a solution would have been forthcoming. This podcast, therefore, is a plea for help. I'm going to try to fully outline my situation, because that's not even fully outlining it. I promise it won't take too long. But I'm going to fully outline my situation in the hope that I've missed something obvious out, which can be addressed and resolved as soon as possible. I should really emphasise that I want to be wrong in this podcast. I hope that I'm spewing rubbish. I want to be mistaken. Please get in touch and tell me where I'm going wrong. What has become clear recently to me is that my situation is not as unique as I first thought. Just the other week I was doing starting duties for our club's spring meeting, and in 90 minutes of starting duties, that's 10 tee times and 30 people, there were 2 other members that I encountered in the same handicap predicament as me. Ultimately, I just want to know and work through the actions I can take to help the governing bodies help us. So some necessary context here from Scottish Golf before I move into my situation. From the Scottish Golf website, it says that Scottish Golf will now facilitate the administration of the handicaps of all Scottish Golf Club members. This will be a similar experience to what they are doing now, just in a different place. More information outlining what this will look like will be communicated shortly. That's from their website. So in short, what this means is that golf clubs themselves are no longer responsible for handicap processing. They used to be, but now they no longer are. They're passing over this responsibility to the national governing bodies. This is happening everywhere, not just in Scotland, but yeah. Clubs are no longer responsible for handicap processing. It's now the job of the national governing bodies where they'll be processing handicaps on one central database. So the positives of that is that there's less possibility for handicap manipulation at individual clubs or by individual players, because it's going to be managed directly by the national bodies themselves. And there's also less technical workload on volunteer committees, so it helps out the handicap committees across the country and indeed the world. But the negatives of this new structure that I can see is that clubs now have less control over the handicaps of their members, and any issues with handicaps need to be directed to a higher power. That is in inverted commas. So if I have an issue with my handicap, I can't resolve it through my club, I have to resolve it through a national governing body. And in my case, the national governing bodies involved are Scottish Golf and England Golf. Now, at the end of 2019, there was an initial attempt by Scottish Golf to remove 11 ISVs, that's independent software vendors, and replace them with one system of their own choosing/recommendation. It's worth noting this was massively objected to by clubs across Scotland, and this forced Scottish Golf to soften their proposal. So what that means is that Scottish Golf wanted all scores to be posted by everyone solely through their app and directly into their system. As it is, scores can now be posted via the software a club chooses to use, such as How Did I Do or Intelligent Golf. Your club may have a different one, but all you need to know is this: the scores still end up in your Scottish Golf record regardless of how you input them, and they result in an accurate handicap index. Unless your handicap index is maintained in another country, say, I don't know, England. Which brings me to my situation. Let's get into it. Right, if you thought I'd gone into depth about my handicap situation already, you are sadly mistaken. I'm just going to run through a brief timeline of what's happened to me and how it could potentially impact my current season and schedule. So the system, the World Handicap System, came into play 2nd of November 2020 in the UK. As soon as this happens, my handicap became NA, non-applicable, on How Did I Do. I could no longer enter events through my Scottish clubs, let alone sign into them, which is what most people I ended up contacting about this issue assumed the issue to be. Of course, this meant I also could not enter scores post-round. There was one instance where my club managed to get me to play a competition with my NA handicap, but then I couldn't even enter a score for it anyway, so it was all illegitimate, unfortunately. So I went to England Golf for help because that's where my home club is, and I had a bit of correspondence with England Golf. Let me start by saying, because I probably sound a bit angry and frustrated on this podcast, I don't really mean that to be. I think it's without doubt a thoroughly thankless task right now to be working in the handicap department of any governing body right now. But initially, the England Golf correspondence was unhelpful. I sent an email to England Golf on the 15th of November 2020. I'm going to include dates for reasons that will become apparent, but on the 15th I received a default automated response telling me to hold tight for a response, which is absolutely fair enough because that was 2 weeks into the new system happening. It must have been an incredibly busy time for the handicap departments globally, let alone just in England. It's worth noting that I had different respondents to each of my emails. I'll keep them anonymous. So here we are. The following is a timeline of my correspondence with England Golf, and I'm including the rough contents of each email, so you don't have to go through the same cycle if you're in the same position as me. Wow, I sound passive-aggressive today. I don't mean to be. I'm sorry. These are just facts. So, the first email I got from a human being was from person J. This came 8 days later on the 23rd of November. The response was incredibly unhelpful. They had just copied and pasted frequently asked questions from the England Golf website, which of course I'd already checked because of my situation with my NA handicap. What irritated me about this email actually was that they didn't even change the font from their main website. They had clearly just lifted it, copied and pasted it. And this came after a week of waiting for a response. At this point, I hadn't played a competition for 3 weeks. And I was in quite good form, I'll have you know, so this was quite disappointing as a response. So I responded on the same day, saying that the response was not very helpful because I'd already checked the frequently asked questions and my situation was unique and not covered by them. The second email I got from a human being came 7 days later, on the 30th of November, St. Andrew's Day, as it goes. Person C passed me on to their, waggling my fingers, subject matter expert. So I wait to hear from the subject matter expert. The third email I received from a human being came 9 days later after St. Andrew's Day. That was the 9th of December 2020. I received an email from Person S, and Person S informed me that they believed that my issue had now been resolved and that my handicap would be a digit and not NA. So I went away to check with the appropriate handicap representatives at my English and Scottish golf clubs to see if it had all been resolved. Of course, it hadn't been, obviously. My response a week later on the 16th of December to England Golf, which is a day before my birthday. Lots of notable dates in this. I basically told England Golf my handicap was still NA and it had not been resolved. Nothing had changed. I said, and this is actually quoting directly from the email I sent to them, I believe the solution is for me to obtain a Scottish CDH number in addition to my English CDH, which I'm currently in the process of sorting. My understanding from the World Handicap System manual, which is a very large document by the way, is that England and Scotland are different jurisdictions, meaning if I play in one region, I will need to report my score to the other in order to keep both of my indices accurate and updated. That was my email. I hope you're still with me. I'm aware there's a lot of big words going on here. And this email led me to get a response from Person 4, who I can actually identify as Dennis at England Golf. I can name him because he was the most helpful of the bunch. Dennis is a top lad. He informed me that one handicap per country would be necessary. He said, and I'm quoting from the email, I am afraid that currently this is indeed the case. However, once all countries involved in this big project have moved over to the World Handicap System, then they will work on linking these systems. He went on to say, from then on, you'd be able to use one handicap. Dennis sent me this email on the 23rd of December 2020, 5.5 weeks after my initial inquiry on the 15th of November. This is not only a fairly lengthy timeline of events, but it's also quite sad in a way. Because I'm just picturing it right up until Christmas, and I suspect through Christmas as well. Handicap departments around the world probably had to continuously deal with queries about the new handicap system. I would imagine most issues would have been trivial and easily dealt with through the copy and paste method that I was initially given as a response. But I'm sure many queries like mine may not have had an answer, at least not for now. The saving grace in all of this? That this happened in the height of winter and the majority of the UK golfing population wouldn't normally be golfing or competing. Plus, of course, this is COVID, so UK-wide lockdowns were reintroduced at this time. And whilst social golf could be played in Scotland, I actually ended up returning to England for Christmas. In early January, all golf in England was included in the lockdown, and I was locked down in England as well. So not even social golf could be played, so my handicap quickly became less of a pressing concern. Eventually, once COVID lockdown measures were relaxed somewhat, I was able to return to St. Andrews in April. And the issue at this point was that competitions are back. Competitions are happening. And not only did I need an accurate handicap index to enter and play lots of competitions this year, and if you've listened to my episode 1 of this Free Relief Golf podcast, my season preview, you'll understand that I had planned to enter a lot of competitions and travelling around and all sorts. But not only do I need an accurate handicap index to enter and play in those competitions, but if I do play lots of competitions, I will then have lots of scores that then need subsequent correct processing into my handicap record. So upon return to St Andrews, I set up a Scottish CDH number, and as a result I was able to enter events again in St Andrews. I took the plunge and entered my first competition, and I reported the score back to my English club to keep the records matching, so I'd be maintaining both handicaps, so they should in theory be saying the same thing. However, my English club were not able to manually change the playing conditions calculation, and the competition in question, I played the old course, and it was one of the most miserable days of golf for a lot of people that day. It was very windy all day, and then it started raining in the afternoon, and the PCC was +2, which meant while my score was slightly higher than it normally would be, there would be an allowance, or there should have been an allowance for the playing conditions. However, my English club were not able to manually enter this allowance for the conditions, and so I would have a score in my, well, I currently do have a score in my handicap record in England that is inaccurate, even if it is only slightly so. So it would appear currently that it is impossible for me to accurately maintain my home club handicap based on my English club by reporting back scores that I've shot in Scotland. I understand it's a lot to process, but basically in short, it just means that right now my handicap is still accurate to my playing ability. However, the more scores I put in on bad weather days is going to cause my handicap to become inaccurate. That's all you need to know. So let's have a quick little break, and when we come back I will explain what my options are with regard to resolving these issues. Right, so from my understanding of my situation, I hope I've made it clear. It probably doesn't sound clear, but you get the rough idea. It's very difficult for me to maintain an accurate handicap with having one in England and one in Scotland. So from my understanding, my options moving forward, again, I must reiterate that I hope I am missing something here and that there is a solution that I'm unaware of. I want to be mistaken. I want to look silly in making this podcast. Please listen to it and laugh at me, because there must be something that I'm missing here to not be able to keep one accurate handicap. Well, so my first option to resolve this issue is just to turn pro. I could become a professional golfer. The pros of this, well, I wouldn't have to deal with any handicap headaches ever again. Handicaps would not be an issue. I would simply be turning from amateur golfer to non-amateur golfer. And if you want to know more about how that process is going to look next year, you should check out my second episode of this Free Relief Golf podcast about the proposed rule changes to amateur status in 2022. The cons of turning pro, of course, is that it's not viable in the slightest right now. I wouldn't earn any money playing mini-tour golf, and I wouldn't even have the necessary qualifications to teach, so it's a stupid decision. So really, it's not even an option. Well, certainly not a good option at that. Option number 2 is that I could move back to England and play my golf there. The pros of that is that my full handicap database is held down there at my club in England, and my handicap would be preserved and easily maintained by only submitting general scores and playing competitions in England. By getting rid of the Scotland factor, I'd be able to maintain an accurate English handicap. Option 3, and this of course is the most likely, seeing as I live in St Andrews right now, is to stay in St Andrews, Scotland. The pros of this, of course, is that the golf and practice facilities are world class. But the cons, well, by staying and playing my golf here in Scotland, I will have a Scottish handicap which is completely disconnected from my entire handicap record and history found on my England handicap database. So it would always be inaccurate to an extent with regard to the concept of inbuilt memory, because it wouldn't be able to, I'm waving my fingers, remember my good rounds in the past. Without being able to accurately enter my Scottish scores, my England handicap would also be affected due to, as I explained, the lack of being able to enter a PCC along with my score in the record. Without entering those scores into my record, my handicap would be a lie. If I just ignored the rounds that I played and chose to just keep my handicap as it is, whether the rounds are good or bad, it would be a lie. I've played competitive golf since then, and my handicap wouldn't reflect that. On the flip side, if those scores were entered with incorrect PCCs, my handicap would be less of a lie because I've entered the scores and I'm still reporting all the competitive golf that I'm playing. But my handicap would then become more inaccurate with every round I played. If you've made it this far, all you need to know is this. This is a simplified version. I'm now scared of entering competitions. Why? Because every competitive round I play is going to dig a deeper handicapping hole. Until the time comes, at least, that all systems globally are finally linked together. But no one knows when that's going to happen. How long will that take? And until then, I suspect many others who potentially are listening to this podcast, we're all stuck in limbo. I think ultimately my best solution is to play as many competitions as I can up here in Scotland to make sure I've got 20 scores in my record, and then just be able to maintain my Scottish handicap with accurate PCCs and report as best as I can to my England handicap. But even then, that still is not... That's not what the World Handicap System is about, right? The World Handicap System, it says it in the name, it does what it says on the tin, or it should do what it says on the tin. It's meant to be a global system, and now there's a border between England and Scotland. I know that at some point in the future this will be resolved, but right now it's stressing me out, and it's making me scared of entering competitions. And that's not a place where I should be, nor should any other amateur golfers out there in the UK. Or maybe the world. This could be a global problem. I haven't even thought of that. That's scary. But yeah, just take a moment to digest that. And when I come back, I'll give some concluding thoughts. And hopefully I'll have a chance to use my cheerful voice. Right, some concluding remarks. I have no doubt that the World Handicap System will be a successful system implemented efficiently for many years to come. Too much effort and money has been invested into the global rollout by the R&A and the USGA for it not to work. However, in the short term, players in my position are in danger of being alienated from competitive golf. I want to follow the rules. I don't want to have inaccurate handicaps. I want to play competitions and allow the handicap system to work seamlessly in the background. With change always comes teething trouble. I was definitely expecting teething trouble. I can understand it, but the lack of practical solutions by many of the game's governing bodies is a scary feeling. Because with the elite amateur season beginning, leaving behind amateur golfers who need legitimate handicaps to gain entry to tournaments on merit is simply not on. I'm now scared of entering and competing in any qualifying stroke play event for the fear that every round I cannot accurately report into my handicap record is creating a bigger hole to later extract myself from when it comes to remedying my position. I can play in scratch competitions. My handicap meets the eligibility criteria for the tournament comfortably, so I don't feel guilty about entering the scratch competitions, but those scores that are then created by playing in them is what the problem actually is. Thanks for taking the time to listen to my plea for help. I appreciate all the support this podcast has received so far, and if you want to continue to support me, make sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify and Instagram, so that you're updated when future episodes are released. I'm hoping future episodes will be more optimistic than this one. If you've been similarly affected by the handicap system and would like to share your story, I reiterate what I said at the start, send me an email at freddielawrence.golf@gmail.com. Maybe we can help each other out. Maybe you've got a solution that I hadn't thought of. Maybe I've got a solution that you hadn't thought of. But then you wouldn't have to contact me. You've just heard it. Until then, thank you. I've been Freddie. You've been lovely. See you next time.